Right On Press presents Allegiance, a Right On Press feature. Distributed by Right On Press. Copyright 2021 Right On ePublishing LLC, all rights reserved. Narrated by Terry Jenkins. CNN, November 7th, 2020. Biden defeats Trump in an election he made about character of the nation. Alexei leans back in a cheap floral chair. It squeaks as he pushes the front legs off the ground. He uses his legs to rock himself back and forth as he takes a sip of the scotch and soda he's nursing. The laptop in front of him has the CNN article pulled up. Alexei closes the screen with a deep sigh. He runs his hands through his uncombed hair. Some strays come loose and wrap around his fingers. It's been 5 years since he moved to America, and although he wants to go back to his home country, he has a mission, which is running low on time. This article showcases his failures, and he knows that it will not go unnoticed by his boss and his boss's boss. 5 years of work down the drain. It wasn't that Alexei was terrible at his job. On the contrary, up until recently he had been getting high praise, but not even the most experienced operative could handle working with the United States' current president. The plan had been simple. As a lobbyist and analyst for Ballot Partners, tear the government apart from the inside out, make small changes periodically until there was no way for either political party to make a difference in their one-term office. Alexei had successfully gotten Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. He orchestrated the alt-right movements in Charleston, and he helped burn buildings in Portland during the Black Lives Matter riots. Alexei had grown up thinking Americans were ignorant, stupid, and lazy individuals who listened to anything someone said on the television. And he was right. Still, it didn't account for their stubbornness. Stubborn Americans were a double-edged sword. They could be beneficial, blindly supportive of issues they barely had any knowledge of, but they could also be an immovable force. If there were undeniable proof the sky was green, they would die insisting it was blue. Americans were hard to sway, more challenging than he had anticipated, which is why he needed Trump to be elected to a second term. He needed just a bit more time with a president that could be easily manipulated. Biden's team wouldn't even meet with any Russian delegates, whether they were undercover or not. Others called him overly cautious, but honestly, he was smart. Smart Americans were Alexei's least favorite kind. Alexei's phone lights up, a call from an unknown number. It rings 3 times before shutting off. A few seconds later, it rings again. This time, Alexei picks it up. All Americans are equal. A deeply accented voice speaks. But some animals are more equal than others. Alexei replies with no emotion. He opens his laptop, clicking out of the CNN article he had been brooding over and opening a document that had been added to his secure server. Why haven't you submitted your monthly report? I assumed. Assumption is for Americans. Send the report, Alexei. Alexei lowers the front legs of the chair down softly. Have you not seen the news? The election has been called, but Trump is still in the White House. The mission continues until January 21st. After that, you will be brought back to Russia to face your superiors. Understood? Understood. Komdiv. Fox News, December 11th, 2020. Trump states that he will not leave the White House. Alexei stops his morning jog to read the article on his phone. With his other hand, he holds his water bottle to his lips. He sits down on a bench, sweat dripping from his forehead onto the screen. For the first time since the election, he felt more in control. It hadn't taken much time to convince Trump to fight the results. In fact, Alexei didn't have to do anything at all. What he did was talk to Trump's cabinet. Trump couldn't be a one-man band in charge. He needed the support of his administration. Whispers of conspiracy were not uncommon in Congress's concrete floors, but it was easier to embed doubt in a Republican mansion than a bipartisan cafeteria. The morning run must be cut short. Alexei had work to do. He couldn't afford to let this opportunity fly past him. It was probably his last chance. Austin American Statesman, January 1st, 2021. Texas's Governor Abbott deploys State National Guard to White House in support of President Trump. The newspaper is outside Alexei's apartment, a picture of soldiers in uniform lined up in a block formation. He brings the paper inside and closes the door. Sitting down at his small kitchen table, Alexei throws the paper down and opens his laptop. He takes intervals of sipping hot coffee and typing up his report. He writes about the phone call he had with Senator Cruz, how they went back and forth about COVID, with Alexei emphasizing how it hadn't affected the top 1%, which makes up the majority of donors to Republican coffers. Alexei made a note to talk about how the election had Trump down in the dumps, how none of the staff members could make him happy. Cruz went on about throwing a rally in support of him, but Alexei urged him to think bigger. It took a while, but eventually Cruz got the idea of asking Governor Abbott about deploying the National Guard to the White House. "Can he do that?" Alexei asked with fake confusion. "They did it in Vietnam. It's up to Abbott." "I'm sure the president will be pleased to hear about this, Senator. Make sure you're the one to tell him." Cruz thanked Alexei and hung up. Alexei closes his laptop and brings his coffee to the couch. He sips the now lukewarm beverage and stares out the balcony window. He starts to imagine himself back home. Instead of rows of houses, there would be rows of wheat. There would be more birds, especially vultures, screaming at each other over their latest meal. There would be no horns blasts or sirens wailing. The only sounds would come from the natural rustling of bushes. His phone rings 3 times, then stops. It rings again. "All animals are equal." "But some animals are more equal than others," Alexei replied. "We've gotten your report. We have a new mission for you." CNN, January 6, 2021. Republican Senator Ted Cruz found dead in D.C. hotel. Alexei closes his eyes as hot water rains down from the shower head, and the hard pellets soak through his shirt, his pants, and his socks. The water turns light pink as it spins down the drain. His fingers shake as he unbuttons the shirt. It falls to the floor of the tub with a soft smack. His pants and socks follow. The cloth clogs the drain. The water begins to rise to his ankles, then up to his calves. Once the tub starts to flood over, Alexei shuts it off and steps out. Parts of his clothing float on top of the blood-stained water. He stands in front of the fogged mirror, looking at the fuzzy outline of himself. The ring of his phone turns his head. He wraps a soft towel around his waist and walks out of the steamy bathroom. It rings 3 times, then stops. Alexei picks it up, his thumb wavering over the place where the accept button will appear soon. He answers the call quickly, lifting the phone to his ear. All animals are equal. But some animals are more equal than others, Alexei says quickly. Have you secured your alibi? Yes. Are you back at your base? Yes. You need to. I do not need to be checked on, Comdiv, Alexei said, squeezing the phone in his hand so hard his knuckles turn white. Alexei, the voice says softly. It's Nick. I am not your commander right now. Just a friend giving you advice. Burn the evidence, all of it. Secure your alibi. I will. Alexei, I know how hard it is to take a man's life. I understand it was necessary for the sake of my mission. I will always do what is required. Alexei closes his eyes as a single tear traces down his face and drips off his chin. His eyes travel to his front door. There is someone at the door. Alexei drops the phone and it falls to the carpeted floor with a soft thud. Alexei's hands go to his head, cradling it as he rocks his body back and forth. Tears drip onto the floor, creating dark spots on the carpet. He slaps one hand over his mouth as a scream rips out against his will. Pieces of his torn hair wrapped around his fingers. Tears and snot mix, covering his hand. He lowers his hand, his mouth wide open, but the scream went silent. Only choked inhales and shaky exhales. With closed eyes, Alexei takes deep breaths. He holds his hands out in front of him, his fingers stiff and twitching with each breath. After a while, his fingers steady, his heart rate slows, and his tears dry against his flushed skin. New York Times, January 8th, 2021. New York Congressman Anthony Brindisky arrested on alleged involvement with Senator Cruz's death. Alexei balances a case of coke in between his hip and the wall as he struggles to find his keys. Need help with that, honey? An older woman with silver hair says. Hello, Mrs. Emerson. How are you doing today? Alexei asks. Mrs. Emerson grabs the box, holding it with both hands. Doing fine. The grandkids just left. I love them to death, but I just don't have the energy anymore to keep up with them. Alexei smiles, and he finds his keys in his back pocket. Did you just come back from your trip? How was California? See any movie stars? It was hot. And no, everyone is staying inside for the most part. Alexei lies easily. Well, good to see them following rules. Did you see the news yet? After a short shake of his head, Mrs. Emerson sighs. Some New York congressman was arrested. They say he murdered that Texas senator. Oh, Alexei puts on an inquisitive look. Why did he do it? You know how angry New Yorkers are. His poor wife, though. I wouldn't want to be married to a man in jail. Not much use to have a man who isn't around, you know what I mean? Alexei moves his gaze away from the older woman and puts his key in the lock. Oh, I struck a nerve there, didn't I? I'm sorry, dear. It's fine, Mrs. Emerson. I need to clean up, so I'll be going. Thank you again. Alexei says these words choppy and avoids the gaze of his neighbor, hoping to end the conversation. Los Angeles Times, January 10th, 2021. Government shutdown. How this affects Biden's transition. New York Times, January 10th, 2021. Another life lost. Los Angeles cop shoots unarmed black teacher. Alexei adjusts his mask before it falls off his ear. He was trying to balance holding his wallet, phone, keys, and the hot, dark roast coffee he had ordered. "Let me get that for you, friend." A young man grabs the wallet and phone from his arms before it slipped into the muddied snow. Alexei sighs. "Thank you. Of course, we need to spread some kindness, especially today, before the rioting starts up again." "Are there always riots after a government shutdown?" Alexei asks, sticking his phone into his back pocket and wallet in the front. "No, it's not about the shutdown." Seeing the confused expression on Alexei's face, the man continued. "Another brother who was shot by a cop in L.A. The guy was a school teacher carrying a bundle of student projects." "That's horrible." "Damn right. There's a peaceful march on Penn Avenue at 5 if you want to join." "I will be there." The man walked away, holding a fist in the air. "Let there be peace," he says. Some of the people walking by raising their fists as well. The man nods to them as he walks down the sidewalk. CNN, January 12, 2021. BLM protesters take to the streets after the alleged murder of Trevor Edson by LA police. Austin American-Statesman, January 12, 2021. Texas State House members hold press conference criticizing U.S. government for halting the investigation into Cruz's death. Alexei holds a slice of pizza in one hand as he turns up the volume on the television. One spokeswoman speaks as a silent version of the press conference is playing behind her. Governor Abbott was described to be red in the face as he spoke on the FBI's investigation, or rather the lack thereof, into the late senator's death. One spokeswoman speaks as a silent version of the press conference is playing behind her. Abbott name-drops members of Congress as well as Deputy Director Bowditch for their lack of progression on the case. Alexei changes the channel. "The government is on vacation," Stephen Colbert says from his desk. "I wouldn't want to work on a case for Ted Cruz if I was getting paid. So how do they expect anyone to work without the main incentive? In all seriousness, Senator Cruz's death is a tragedy and should be investigated. But there are other things to worry about right now. Coronavirus has reached a new peak. The vaccine distribution is delayed. And protesters are being arrested in protest across the country. We need to focus on the problems of the living. For more news on this, it's time for a new segment I call..." Alexei changes the channel. "If they would just mind their own businesses, then nothing bad would happen. It's not hard to live a quiet life in America. Do you know how many Americans die each day? Does their death need a riot? No. Let's not forget that Senator Ted Cruz was murdered in his hotel room not even 1 week ago, and no one is talking about it anymore. The government isn't even investigating the case. Why aren't buildings burning because of that?" Sean Hannity's spit runs down his chin as the veins in his head start to protrude and turn a deep purple. Alexei changes the channel. Don Lemon appears on CNN. The photos behind him are a montage of protesters at a rally. What will it take for this violence to stop? How many more innocent deaths are needed before they open their eyes and see the wrong of what they've done? The cop who killed Trevor Edson has yet to be arrested, and he probably never will be. Don sighs and his shoulders sag a bit. I'm tired of reading the same story with different names. I'm tired of sharing the backstories of innocent black people who deserve to live their lives. And I'm tired of the government letting this become a pattern. They allow us to write Black Lives Matter in their streets, but won't pass a bill to end the no-knock policy. They'll let us scream in pain in the streets, but pull us over for routine stops? Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting different results. Well, maybe it's time we do something different. Washington Post, January 13th, 2021. Troops are sent to block Texas National Guard in D.C. New York Times, January 13th. Burning and looting accompanies BLM protest in 25 major cities. More and more black SUVs park in the street below Alexi's apartment. Alexi drinks whiskey from a coffee mug as he watches more soldiers get out, dressed in full gear with M4 carbines strapped to their backs. "It looks like a parade down there or something," Mrs. Emerson says, her hair wrapped in a silk net. "It's not like I was going out for anything anyway, but I was looking forward to having a nice evening walk." "I wanted to get some takeout dumplings," Alexi admits to his neighbor. "From the little place on Jefferson? That's my favorite. They have this onion soup that makes me, Mrs. Emerson sighs. "Now you've got my mind on it. Think we can make the jump?" Alexi smiles as he dramatically looks over the balcony edge down the 6 flights of windows below to a hard concrete sidewalk. "If you go first, I'll follow." Mrs. Emerson laughs as she shakes her head. "Are they letting any deliveries in?" "Not that I've seen." "Well, you can come over and eat some casserole with me if you'd like, Alex." Alexi smiles at the sweet old woman. "That's very kind, Mrs. Emerson, but I've eaten my weight in that fruit cake you gave me last week." Some gunfire went off. Mrs. Emerson clutched the collar of her robe and held it to her chest. "Heavens me! I feel like I'm in a war zone." Alexi's smile falters. How tame this situation was compared to the larger reality playing out across the country. Alexi thought of how this conflict was only the beginning. A pang of sympathy filled his chest, the feeling so foreign he almost mistakes it for regret. "I was part of Now in the 70s, you know." Mrs. Emerson giggles. "Burned my bra in the middle of Pennsylvania Avenue. I had long hair with feathers braided in. I disappointed every nun and priest I passed. I went to anti-war marches. I screamed on Capitol Hill." Alexi expected some sort of turnaround. "These kids nowadays don't know how good they have it" type speech. "It's worse now, though." Alexi turns his head to face the old woman, who has dropped her usual carefree smile. "With innocent people being murdered, cops shooting rubber bullets at protesters, the military in the streets with assault rifles, spies manipulating our politicians, it makes me sick. The world can't live in peace until people start thinking about each other, instead of just themselves. Selfish people run this world, Alex. But we can't let their selfish ideas ruin our own lives." Alexi can only nod. Fox News, January 14, 2021. In defense of the State National Guard, Texas officially announces their plan to secede from the United States. Alexi holds his laced fingers over his mouth, his elbows dug into the glass table he is leaning on. Events were spiraling out of control, and Alexi had a gut feeling that everything was about to get a lot worse. He stares at the blank document page in front of him, the small black line blinking at him, silence screaming at him to start writing up his report. He didn't even know where to begin. The conversation Alexi had to do with Governor Abbott last week has been reduced to mere flashes in his memory. "If they won't do something, I will. Like hell, I'll support that old bat in the House again. A time when enough is enough. My career is at stake here. This will be my final stand." What had started off as a nice, tight skein was now a mass of loose threads, with no way to find the starting point. Somehow Abbott had gotten it in his mind that succeeding would be the best option. Alexei at the time thought this was a bluff that Abbott would throw out to prompt the government to give him what he wanted. Apparently that did not work out, or maybe Abbott is just as crazy as everyone says. Texas was officially leaving the United States and becoming its own nation. Either this was going to make Alexei's career or destroy it. He unlaced his fingers and started to type up his report. CNN, January 16, 2021. 4 other states intend on joining Texas in their secession. Alexei grips his hair as he watches the CNN title card move slowly across the bottom of the screen. Current events were moving so fast he swore he was getting whiplash. At least nothing worse could possibly happen. Tampa Bay Times, January 17, 2021. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced that they will join the secession. Fuck. Alexei's phone rang 3 times. Op-ed, January 20th, 2021. Hawaii under siege by Chinese strike force. Congress paralyzed between civil war and invasion. But some animals are more equal than others. Alexei says into his phone. Things are getting out of hand here, Nick. There's not much I can do. Your comrade has been reassigned, Alexei. You will answer directly to me now. Alexei's eyes widen at the sound of Yuri Yakov, his old training commander. Known as the Iron Ox, he is notorious for covering up mistakes. Mistakes that ran their mouths, mistakes that defied orders, mistakes that saw too much. Yes, sir, Alexei says as sweat begins to collect on his forehead. Putin has decided to use this opportunity to take back what was once ours. Your mission is over. You are to report to the Dulles airport tomorrow and fly back to Moscow. Details will be sent later today. The phone disconnected immediately after the last word was spoken, but Alexei keeps his phone to his ear. The cool metal felt like ice against his skin. Russia was going to take back Alaska, using the Hawaiian invasion as a cover. America would surely declare war on any who attacked their mainland territories. Why would Putin send such an order? Although the U.S. government is shut down, that didn't mean it was any safer to invade than before. Alexei fell on the couch and rubbed the back of his neck. The rumors must be true. Putin is sick. He cannot hold on to the presidency for much longer and is making one last big push to secure his place in history as the greatest Russian leader. He doesn't care about the potential soldiers he will lose their lives in the world war that would inevitably come from this action. He doesn't care that families will be torn apart. He only cares about his image, the one they will erect statues to and name buildings after. For the first time, Alexei saw what had been right in front of his face the entire time. Putin and Trump were the same. Both men put power above humanity, above their people. They only care about the fame, the recognition, the legacy that will follow them. Putin doesn't care about Alexei, who had done so much in his name, trusting that when he returned home he would be welcomed back as a hero. Putin didn't care about him. It wouldn't make any difference if he came home. In fact, it would probably be less paperwork if Alexei mysteriously didn't make it back. Alexei looks out the window. Rays from the sunrise create white crystals that dance on his dingy kitchen floor. The light moves slowly across the room with the sun. The mesmerizing movement allows Alexei to relax. He focuses on the light, how it retracts when clouds block its path, the outline of birds that fly past. He stares until the whole floor is illuminated. This is the world at peace, for 1 hour at least. No phone calls to answer, no mission to engage in, no blood to clean up. Alexei walks to the closet. Hanging over the pole is the light blue tie, the stains of blood now dried in a splatter formation. He couldn't find it in himself to burn this one. It was the last thing he had from his mother. She had given it to him before he left. "Is this? You look like a proper American." Alexei had rolled his eyes as his mother tied it for him. "I won't be American for very long, Matushka. They're disgusting and easy to trick. I'll be home before you know it." His mother had tightened it, so it made him choke. "Alexei," she replied, saying his name in a clipped tone. "Villainizing them will not help you. They are people with families just like you. They are working for a government just like you. But their government is corrupt and full of liars. And ours are made out of rainbows and unicorns? Politics is dirty work, Alexei. I had hoped you would never be part of it like your father was. But he didn't have a choice. And now, neither do you." She finished fixing his tie, running her fingers over it. "Just be careful, Alexei. Remember to use your heart as well as your mind." She died 2 years into his mission. He was not allowed to go back to bury her. There was no funeral in Russia, but Alexei had laid out the tie on his table and placed a single Indian lotus flower on top. He prayed that her soul entered readily into the gates of heaven, where she would reunite with her husband. He cried silently as fireworks went off outside his apartment that hot July night. Now he runs the tie through his fingers. If he is caught with this, it would only lead to trouble. If the Americans caught him, it would mean prison. If the Russians caught him, it would mean prison or death. The only logical thing to do is get rid of it. Burn it, then throw the ashes away. He knew the steps. He knew how to clean blood out of ties. He knew how to kill a man and frame another for it. But he didn't know how to let go of this tie. It had to be done soon, but not right now. Alexei held it tight in his grasp and laid down on the couch, bringing the tie to his lips. He kissed it before shutting his eyes. New York Times, January 21st, 2021. Leaders from around the world plan emergency G20 summit to discuss the American Civil War. Fox News, January 21st, 2021. Texas announced that passports are needed to enter the former U.S. state. Alexei throws 2 duffel bags over his shoulder. The apartment he has lived in for 5 years is now bare. It hadn't taken more than 2 hours to collect his things and be ready to move out. A new agent would be living in this apartment in a week, and Alexei would be back in Russia. He'd be reprimanded at best. At worst, he'd be silenced. He had no family back home, no one to vouch for his character. Nick wouldn't be able to look out for him this time. This whole time, Alexei has been begrudgingly living in America, working hard every day with the hope that he would go back to Russia with pride. He would be welcomed home with open arms and live a comfortable life outside the city. He dreamed of a farm with crops to tend to, and not a single person in sight. He would live out the rest of his days without having to lie or murder. Alexei reflected on the facts. He wasn't a good soldier because he couldn't kill, and he wasn't a good son because he hadn't been with his mother when she died, and he wasn't a good spy because he couldn't finish this mission. The only thing he was going back to was failure and death. There was nothing good for him in Russia, so what was the point in walking towards his death? Why prolong the inevitable? Placing his duffel bags down, Alexei walks out to his balcony, overlooking the D.C. skyline. With shaky hands, he pulls a knife out of his pocket. His family name is carved on the handle. He was 7 when his father presented the blade to him. He was a firefighter in Pripyat and was sent to Chernobyl after the explosion. He left a strong, confident man, but returned thin, with flaky skin that fell off in sheets. He never stopped coughing. Even his last breath was one that came with a struggle. He had pressed the knife into Alexei's hand and given him one last piece of advice. One can't have 2 deaths, but you can't avoid one. Alexei opens the knife, admiring the blade that hadn't taken away any life. Its sole purpose was to harm, yet it sat silently in the back of his mind, hovering over him like a shadow. The shadow of his father, reminding Alexei that his life was his own. It did not belong to one country, one mission. Whoever the new agent would be, they would continue working towards a disastrous end of the United States. How many would fall victim to this mission that was brought on by ego and greed? Alexei knew very well the effects of a civil war, and with Americans he assumed the damage would be worse. Could he go back to Russia and live out his life knowing what he left behind? They were just Americans. Stubborn, cocky, and passionate. They were, at times, polite, and they stood up for what they believed. They were optimistic. Picking up the duffel bags, Alexei walks out of the apartment. His feet seem to walk on their own. They take him downtown, away from the airport, away from where he is expected. The sun begins to set as Alexei walks up stone stairs to a front door decorated with a silver wreath. His fist shakes as he knocks at the door. "Mr. Soledov? What brings you here?" "Honey, who is it?" A feminine voice calls from inside the house. "A political analyst with the Trump campaign. We have worked together for a while. I'll be right back." He steps out on the doorstep and closes his front door. Alexei looks into the eyes of the FBI's deputy director. "I'm here to confess to the murder of Senator Ted Cruz. I've been conspiring with Donald Trump for the last 5 years to disassemble the United States government under the order of Vladimir Putin. I waive my right to an attorney, and I promise to cooperate fully with the FBI." The end.